Lehua to the Lehua side.
But before we get to the main story, I wanted to ask you folks if you could share a little bit about yourself. Why don't you start here, Healani? Where are you from? Who are your family? What is your ohana? Because I think our listening audience needs to know that family background. And of course, when you're an advocate, it's good to know where that attitude came from. It had to be in the blood, in the koko.
Yeah, aloha.
Welcome back to the First Friday show.
Yeah,
Healani.
thank you so much for having me. My name is Healani Sonoda Pale. I'm married to Shane Pale, who's from Molokai. And I was born and raised on Oahu. My family is originally from Kahana Valley. And my grandmother was born, raised there. And I also have roots on the Big Island. My father has been very active in the sovereignty movement for many, many years. And my mother has also been a very outspoken community leader, and I think that's where I got that from. I'm also, so currently I live in Kuli'o'o, and I have my undergraduate degree in Hawaiian Studies, my master's in education. I was a student of Mililani Trask, and I think that has a lot to do with my politics, and I'm very proud that she was my kumu. And also I was very involved in the 90s with Kalahui Hawaii, and I got a lot of my political training there as well. So I'm very happy that I did get that training and that opportunity to work with Kalahui back in the 90s. And I see a lot of our people, our citizens out there doing the work in the community too.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. Mm-hmm. How about yourself, Lehua? A little bit of your background and your education?
You know, I grew up in Waipahu. My parents still live in the house I grew up in, and you know, my mom is originally from South Kona. My dad actually grew up in Halawa housing, so he experienced, you know, what it was like when they built the stadium. Went to Radford High School, had a really hard life, but they really wanted to give us every opportunity they never had. They never got to go to college. My mom went for a little bit, but never got to finish, and so, you know, that was a huge thing for them to give us those opportunities they never had. So graduated from Kamehameha schools like Healani, Hawaiian Studies major. That's how we know each other. And I attended the William S. Richardson School of Law. And so, you know, as Healani said, my mentor too is Mililani Trask, yourself, Mililani, you know, doing all the work in Kalahui back in the 90s. I think no matter where you go, if you're in education or if you're at the legislature, that work and that becomes a part of who you are. And so just excited to be here and to share with the community some of the things that has been going on that will have an impact upon.
You know, I think this is an important show for all of us because we're getting to the point with regards to Na'i Aupuni, Kana'i Olovalu, an effort that is dragged on for years. People aren't really sure where it's going. And then interfacing with it, suddenly there arises the Department of Interior rulemaking process. Right. And I thought it would be good to begin historically by going back to the rulemaking process and to talk with you both about it. Your mana'o about where this DOI rulemaking process came from, a little bit of history for our viewers. I certainly was shocked to see it come out. And, you know, I participated not only in giving some testimony at the Capitol, but coming back to the Big Island where I live. But, you know, there's been quite a bit of discussion about how we even got into a situation, no one knew anything, and suddenly the Department of Interior is hosting a rulemaking procedure. Right. Where did it come from?
Yeah.
Well, and so what basically happened, as you know, was from 2000, the Kaka bill was in Congress and it failed. Even when we had senior senators there, it wasn't able to advance. And so, you know, late in the decade of 2000, it was looking like it was going to be a failure. They were looking at other avenues. So the first I know I heard of it was when Robin Danner had the ear of President Obama at an Asian American and Pacific Islander conference where she asked President Obama about him supporting a rulemaking process. And then thereafter, the next person I heard speak of it was Senator Schatz when he was recently elected to Congress. So that was when I first even heard of this process being considered. And it's interesting because even in 2014, when it came out, the press release came out on June 23rd. Less than a week later, they were already having public meetings. What kind of education, what kind of process where people could be informed about what was going on? You know, not even a week later, they're holding meetings. But even with that, that's some of the information Healani is going to share is what was the outpouring that came, even with that short time frame, and how our community responded at those meetings like yourself.
Even with very little notice, the Hawaiian community came out. So it was, I think it was like 5 days before they made their notice and they made it public. And then 5 days later, they had their first hearing. They had 15 hearings all across the islands, on every island, Oahu, Maui, Hawaii, Molokai, Lanai, Kauai. So they had hearings on each island, and like Oahu, they had more than one hearing, and there were hundreds of people. So that's 15, if you think about that, at least 100 at each meeting. The vast majority of them were opposed to any kind of rulemaking for federal recognition. And all those voices went unheard, supposedly. They were transcribed, they were put in the record, but when the DOI came out with their proposed rule in October 2015, they cited written comments, over 5,000 written comments, saying that the majority of these written comments were in support of drafting of a rule for federal recognition with the Native Hawaiian community. So that was a travesty in itself right there.
I think so. But, you know, if you go back to June, early June 2014, suddenly there's an announcement. The DOI is coming to Hawaii. There was no education. There was no preparation. Then a little email came out. There's a 19-page document in the Federal Register you better read if you're going to be making testimony. 19 pages. Then when the document came out posting for the notice where the meetings were going to be, all it said was that there were going to be public hearings where they would receive testimony. So hundreds of people came out, but later they said that they were only going to keep written testimony. They never informed people at the time that they had scheduled the hearings that their testimony would be discarded and thrown out. But I think what was the most interesting thing to me was that we had the Akaka bill. It had been languishing for 12 years in the Congress. The rulemaking DOI process came out. It didn't really actually relate to at least 11 years of the Akaka bill. But what they proposed when they came out was that we could have a Hawaiian nation as long as we would give up being Hawaiian and say that we were Indians. And I think that that was absolutely the wrong approach in Hawaii, but it's the wrong approach with indigenous peoples. I mean, even if you tried that with people that were not indigenous, you know, we'll give you these rights of self-determination if you'll say that you're not Chinese. You know, that's not going to fly in China, you know, any more than being an Indian was going to fly here. But the question that Hawaiians were asking at that time was who initiated this process and why? And it was very clear it didn't come from the Hawaiian people. No one in the state knew anything about it. It came right down to a handful of people, including Robin Danner and others who were intimately involved and later politically appointed to the Kana'i Olovalu. It was the same people.
So I think, well, it's pretty common knowledge now that in March 2014, OHA took a group down there, down to Washington, D.C., and they were down there to lobby the Department of Interior. And that, you know, and then in June of that same year, they came out with the rules. So, and there was also some, you know, speculation about how close Robin Danner and Jade Danner were in terms of lobbying the Department of Interior. I heard Jade was very key in lobbying the Department of Interior. to propose these rules. So it didn't really, it didn't actually, we know it didn't come from the community, that it actually came from a handful of people. And we know that the Danners have been lobbyists for corporations like Arctic Power. You know, their interest lies with corporations and not with the people, really. And
I think this is really how Robin Danner got her background. She started out as an indigenous voice supporting the Alaska pipeline. And she had a very good relationship with Dan Inouye and also Ted Stevens up there from Alaska. But it's interesting that you point out Robin's involvement with the Department of Interior, because we need to remember that at this time there was an investigation that was called for within the Department of Interior. It involved special contractual favors being pursued for Robin Danner and the CNHA. And this occurred within Interior, but it was not in the Indian side of Interior. It was the Trust Territory Interior Deputy, Mr. Baubata, who was reported by his own staff playing favoritism games. CNHA was in there with Robin trying to get some sole source contracts. It did not happen. The solicitor's office stepped in. Mr. Baubata was made to eventually leave office. He had to step out, and then when the investigation was ended, he left the administration. Perhaps this is something we need to take up with the new president. But I believe when I look at the history of it, it's pretty clear it came from the Office of Hawaiian Relations, Kimo Kiloi, private meetings with Robin and a few others, and then he put it into the Federal Register without really having the approval of Interior itself. It was something that happened in a roundabout way without all of Interior knowing. But it's something that I think we need to have the new president look at. We've been months under the Obama administration without a solicitor to investigate what's going on in Interior. Maybe this is the time. Healani, you were working on a report, looking at some statistics, and you were on your way up to Washington, D.C. And I was wondering if you could tell us what occurred up there in Washington, why you went, and were you able to go to Interior and talk with them about the process and some of the concerns?
Yeah, so basically myself, Lainey Hale, Joanna Howard, Nani Ome, and Kiana Marshall, we've been researching the comments because we wanted to read the comments and actually see what they really said. And when we looked at the 2014 comments, and the question was, should we not, or should we propose rules to reestablish a nation-to-nation relationship with the Native Hawaiian community, there was about 5,164 comments submitted. That's less than 1% of the total Hawaiian population or Kanaka Maoli population. And 741 of them, we found, were actually submitted from the Native Hawaiian Road Commission, which was created out of Act 195 in 2011, and whose sole purpose was to create a Hawaiian role and not to lobby the Department of Interior for federal recognition on behalf of Native Hawaiians. So we found that very concerning, and most of those testimonies were unsigned. And then we also found of that 5,000 comments, 1,831 of them were from Imua, Hawaii, which is an organization that is comprised of Native Hawaiian Road Commissioner relatives. Jay Danner, the sister of Robin Danner, the commissioner, Lili Kalakame'lehiva, the mother of Na'alehu Anthony, and some other well-connected Native Hawaiians out there in the community who always side with the state of Hawaii in terms of Hawaiian issues. So we found that as well, and these were postcards. And then we also found 1,021 duplicate testimonies of that 1,800. 1,000 of them were exact duplicates, same names, same testimonies, everything is submitted. So when you count the Imua Hawaii testimonies alone, these postcards now, just postcards, they're 55% of the total testimony of 5,000. So does that really represent the Native Hawaiian voice? And that was really our concern when we saw these comments, when we were researching. And besides that, there were other concerns as well. But those are the main ones. And then in the 2015 comments, there were 54,000 total comments submitted, and 50,000 of them, 50,535 of them were submitted after the December 30th deadline, and actually lots of the comments were submitted after the December 30th deadline. And they were submitted on behalf of some anonymous person who said it was a change.org petition with names of Hawaiians that are leaders in the community who had no idea how their name got on there. And it was actually a fake change.org petition. So that was a huge concern with this, because 50,000 names on there, and they're counting these 50,000 names. And these names were put on there without permission.
How did you find out it was a fraudulent change.org petition?
Researchers. We had people actually went and researched. We contacted change.org. We contacted the Department of Interior. Of course, we didn't get a response about that. And we went through the list as well, and we contacted people that we knew that were on the list. All of them said they had no idea how their name got on there.
But it was interesting, even the language of the petition, it wouldn't seem to be supportive of federal recognition, right? Wasn't it more like...
It was very vague.
Yeah.
And the way, and from my communication, what very little communication I get back from the Department of Interior, is that they're not going to really, they don't have some kind of set rubric where they say, okay, if this testimony says this and this, we'll count it as for the rule or against it. It's very vague how they perceive testimonies, how they claim not to count testimonies. And so we were worried that it could be counted against us. And so that was a huge concern as well. So what we did was we wrote up a report, and we wanted to submit it straight to the Department of Interior, and I went to Washington, D.C. with this report, along with some information, facts, and petitions that hundreds of Hawaiians have signed, that saying basically we reject this process, the Na'i Aupuni process, and that we do not want federal recognition, and we totally oppose those proposed rules, and for reasons I'm sure we're going to go over later. But and I went up to Washington, D.C., tried to get into the Department of Interior, emailed them, called them, got no response until the very day I was supposed to meet. I went there. They knew I was coming. Basically, I posted it on Facebook. I called them, emailed them. For 4 months, I didn't get any response. And finally got a response saying that they're not going to meet with anyone until they've reviewed all the comments. And so I went there, I had someone filming me. I was live streaming the whole thing, shared the documents I was going to submit to the Department of Interior, got into the lobby. They told us to turn the video off, that we can't take pictures in the lobby, and I cannot even submit my paperwork. So it took a lot of, going back and forth with the security that was there. They knew we were coming. I tried to call people down to meet me and to collect the documents, and finally got an attorney to come down to collect the documents and sign off on them. But it took a while, and we weren't treated very well in there. So it's not a very welcoming place. It's not a place where I believe that Hawaiians could actually get their concerns heard, because it is, first of all, it's in Washington, D.C., heavily secured. You can't even take pictures. I can't even interview employees, I was told, of the Department of Interior.
Is there a place where the report that you wrote, the statistics that you find, is posted on the internet so that readers and others can see what is in the report?
Sure. Everything's posted on protestnaiaupuni.com, and we have articles, we have information, we have facts, statistics, and it's basically what we're trying to do is share the information with the community, do what OHA didn't do from the very beginning, and is basically they haven't done any kind of education in the community, and that's what we're trying to do, is do education in the community. My visit to the Department of Interior was an eye-opening, because I realized that we're going to be in an even worse position if we become federally recognized. Imagine having to fly to Washington, D.C. to get your concerns heard, and then not even being sure if you're going to even get an appointment or get to see anyone in there.
One of the things that we had been talking about was this issue of self-determination, that it is a right of peoples. It's not a right of government. It's not a right of state agencies or federal agencies, but of peoples. But when you go back to where this effort begins, after the Akaka bill is, if we could say that it was POW, I think it's sort of morphed into this little monster, but it begins back in 2011 with the passage of 195, and that occurred in the state legislature.
Yes, it did.
You know, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, Lehua, about what happened with Kana'i'olowalu, who really ran it, how those people were designated, and what their job was in terms of their actual mandate that they had.
Well, in 2011 is when the bill was introduced, and it was introduced, the bill is really Brickwood Galutaria, Senator Galutaria's bill, and I think the other signatories were like Malama Solomon, no, Clayton He, it actually might be Senator He's bill, but I know it was he, Galutaria, Kahele, and Pohai Ryan were the Senate proponents on that bill. And so they were the main ones pushing, but really it was Malama Solomon. At the time, Bruce Kepler was a staffer working for Malama Solomon, long time with the civic clubs and pro-federal recognition. And so knowing that things were stalled in Congress, the thought at the time was that if a role was at least established here at the state level, that the federal government could somehow, it would get the process going, basically. That was the whole idea behind it. So it allowed for state recognition and the creation of this role. That bill came over to the House at the time. Representative Hanohano was chair of Hawaiian Affairs.
Yes.
And so she gutted the bill, anything to do with the role, and she just said that, you know, Native Hawaiians are the indigenous peoples of the state of Hawaii. Very short. If you look at the House version of the bill, that's all it said. Then they go into conference and they go back and forth. And this is where I really saw Malama was just adamant about wanting to have a role and wanting to have the process started and feeling like we've been talking about this for so many years, and adamant that she wanted OHA involved in it through the funding. And there was a provision in there about DHHL that I was actually really fighting to get out of the bill. I was saying it didn't belong there. There was a lot of concern. Actually, Colleen Hanabusa was a congressperson at the time, and she too had some concerns about that language in the bill that basically said that, you know, any amendments to the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act would be authorized or approved. And again, what about the voice of the Native Hawaiian beneficiary? So this is all happening in conference, and ultimately all of that language was left in because the feeling was like they wanted OHA and they wanted DHHL to be a part and to be included in this whole process.
You know, I think the thing is that people, when you look at what the media is saying, and it's very interesting because the Civil Beat, for instance, has taken the editorial position that they're going to support it. The Advertiser, all the big media groups that got thousands of dollars of trust funds to run informational ads, all came out with editorials supporting it. But when you look at it, it was a state legislative measure. The purpose of it was to create a list of Hawaiians who would eventually become voters, but the bill was clear that they needed to have 200,000 registered Hawaiians on that list. That was a little bit less than 2/3 of the number of Hawaiians in the state. The bill also said that Kana'i'olowalu was to be administratively attached to OHA, so that OHA wound up paying for it with our trust money. But the other thing is that by attaching it to OHA, it made the entire process continue as a state process, which eventually the U.S. Supreme Court sees and says, this isn't a bona fide Hawaiian effort. This is going to go to the Ninth Circuit.
Well, and that's where I think the people just continue to misunderstand. Whenever we talk about Act 195 and Kana'i'olowalu, and, you know, I've heard, you know, Robin Danner say, well, it's just a role. It's just like, you know, like a census. You're just taking account of Hawaiians. It doesn't, you know, so why is there this equal protection challenge? But clearly in the bill, if you read it, it defines a qualified Native Hawaiian. If you're defining a Native Hawaiian and you're excluding this process to just Hawaiians, hello, we're back to Rice versus Cayetano again, and that whole equal protection challenge. So I saw the process as problematic to begin with. So 2011 happens, they're claiming they're going to register hundreds of thousands of people. They utterly fail. I mean, the reports as we saw in the media is like 19,000 after 2 years. People just don't respond to
after 2 years and $4+ million.
Right.
Millions of dollars were spent. Now we see that in reality, about 19,000 were enrolled. But Lehua, they came out with all kind of press statements. They had 90,000. Where did all those figures come from?
Well, and that's the frustrating part is that, so because they couldn't get the numbers, what they do in 2013, Senator He at the time, there was a bill that had nothing to do, you had to have been paying attention. It had nothing to do with the role or Kana'i Oluwalu. It had to do with public documents. And what Clayton He did in the Senate Judiciary and Labor, because he was the chair of that committee, is he gutted that bill and he put in language that in essence put these other roles, the Kauinoa role, the OHA registry, which, you know, people would sign on for scholarships and for other unrelated, nothing to do with sovereignty or nation building. And all of these names were automatically added on. And I thought Kekoa Aki, Quinones Aki, and Noe Arista did an awesome article because they said there were people on that list who pre-deceased 2011,
Yes.
and they were all added onto the roll automatically.
Is this information in your report?
We actually submitted testimony to that.
You know, I think it would be a good idea to pull some of that out. I mean, right here in our own First Friday studio, one of our cameramen, Scotty, encountered this very same problem with his mother. We know now that on the list there are people who are dead. Thousands, 80,000, 90,000 names were added from other lists that they gathered, many of which didn't have anything to do with this. But I'm thinking that this is the kind of thing that should be documented and perhaps turned over to the United States Civil Rights Commission, because it appears that there was a huge effort to make it look like there was a state law being implemented. In reality, millions of state trust dollars were paid out, and in the end, not only was the roll doctored to make it appear that it was something it wasn't, but in the very end, the roll that was supposed to be used for the Hawaiian voters was thrown out, along with the Hawaiians themselves. There was never any election. I wanted to see if we could move forward now. We've looked at the Kana'i Olowalu. Then we have this creation of Na'i Aupuni. Once again, OHA hires the attorney, Bill Meheula, why the same attorney that went to get the appraisal for the Kaka'ako land. And a nonprofit allegedly is created, but they continue to be funded by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Then an AHA was called. What happened at the AHA?
Well, first
we certainly
they were
didn't have
supposed
any
to,
cameras.
They were supposed to elect first, right? And then they
That's
threw out
right.
the elections, like you said. And then they said, well, all of you that ran as candidates, you can now automatically participate in this AHA.
But you know, we had the roll. They were going to have an election. How many people were going to be in the election? Was it the 80,000, 95,000 with the added list, or was it just the 19,000 that they actually did enroll when the truth came out? Who was actually supposed to be voting in the election that never happened?
My understanding, it was the larger list, because the candidates who were participating in the process did receive lists so they could make contact and ask for people to vote for them before the election was shelved, as we all know, and people were just unelected and allowed to participate in this AHA.
So I think they ended up with like 121,000 people on that list after they transferred the other list over, and then they certified 95,000. But when they sent the ballots out, they still sent it out to people who were deceased, and And some people even got more than one ballots. There were problems with the ballots. They had people who were on there twice, people who weren't on there at all.
Yeah.
They had people who were, the ballots were supposed to be alphabetized, and there were, I guess, like Lehi Kihoi was the first one on one of the ballots, the Big Island ballot, and there was a huge scandal with that. So the whole process is really was problematic.
The first name on the ballot the ballots are usually alphabetical.
Yeah.
But there was some tamperings to make sure that the Kanilau-Cano commissioners, regardless of whether their name started with A or B, were going to be at the top, you know. Now we've moved from Kanilau-Cano. They got $4
million
plus. There was actually a public vote. The trustees said we're not going to fund them anymore, and after that, I think they continued to get over $1 million. But when it came to Aupuni, how much money did they get?
2.6 million. And so after the June hearings, the DOI hearings, 2014, December 2014, Aupuni was created. They aren't really a nonprofit. They're actually they're not registered as a 401c3 or, so they're not really a nonprofit, and they have another organization, a nonprofit that actually receives the money, is like their fiscal sponsor. And they were appointed by OHA. I mean, we don't even know the people who are.
Well, the Kanilau-Cano commissioners were appointed by Neil Abercrombie,
Right.
you know, and the Aupuni people were appointed by OHA. But, you know, I'll tell you, if you talk with the trustees of OHA, you're going to find that there are several trustees who had no idea what was going on, who had no idea how those folks got designated. And of course, when you look at who's there, it seems many of the old guard were included in the Aupuni effort, but they got an additional $2.6 million for what they were supposed to do. But you're right. The list of the Hawaiian beneficiaries was totally thrown out. The election process was then challenged, and because it appeared to be unconstitutional and they were set for trial, they decided to get rid of the election, and then they called for a constitutional convention. The people that went, who were they? Who were they? How did they get in?
Unelected, and they were on the Kanilau-Cano rolls. They supposedly had 10 people who, you know, recommended them. Some of them didn't even have the 10 people, and some of them actually put the same person 10 times. So it wasn't, they didn't even represent 10 people, some of them. They were unelected. 154 of them, ended up 151 at the first day, which was February 1st. They convened at the Royal Hawaiian Golf Course, and it was supposed to be 20 days of basically writing a constitution and being educated. And I remember when going to a lot of these community meetings that Bill spoke at, and Bill always said, Bill Meheula, the attorney for Aupuni, that it was a process that was for the people, and that the participants will decide what they want to do. They'll make their own schedule. We don't know what they're going to do. They could push for independence, blah, blah, blah. And then the next thing you know, there's a whole week-long schedule, pre-scheduled education week for these unelected candidates or delegates that Aupuni put together. So it was totally controlled by Aupuni. And then, you know, we have Ka'iolani Milham's articles, which came out on the Hawaii Independent online news. And it just shows, we've been saying from day one that this whole process is predetermined for federal recognition. They're preparing the Constitution to for the DOI proposed rules and the final rules when they come out. And sure enough, when we hear back from Hawaiians that were in there that were pushing for independence, like Ka'iolani Milham, we find out that it was predetermined. We find out that they made the rules to benefit the federal recognition cause.
I think that when you look at the process that was followed, millions spent with a false advertising campaign to make it look as though a real effort was being made to enlist the involvement of the Hawaiian people, that it was truly a democratic process. There was going to be an election. and there would be a constitutional convention. These things, this is how America was created. But in reality, none of those things occurred. The list was abandoned. But what did we actually get out of the AHA? You had brought some graphs for us to take a look at, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about what these graphs are showing, because these are actually recorded votes. There were recorded votes at the AHA, which occurred at the gated golf course, surrounded by police.
Yeah. Heavy security. They searched bags. I know they searched the candidates' bags. They didn't allow anyone who was not a candidate in, supposedly, but then some people got in anyway. They were well connected. So I was there the first day when they convened, and was told where I could protest and blah, 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 can't go in. Walter Riddy was there the first day as well. He tried to get in, and he was dragged out by security and police. And he had that all on film as well. So it was really a process that was not transparent and excluded the vast majority of Hawaiians.
You know, not only were the, and Walter tried to get in, he had previously been a delegate, but when he gave it up, when he saw what was happening and he said, I can't participate, he wanted to observe as a kupuna.
Yeah.
They went to a golf course, not a Hawaiian community. It was gated. They brought in heavy security. Then they had these rules. No Hawaiian was allowed to enter. No kupuna was allowed to come and see. No Hawaiian was allowed to pray, to open in a tradition with a traditional prayer. They also elected a sergeant at arms. And then they decided the sergeant at arms needed a security force, so they brought in armed police. It was very, very much controlled by government and by these folks who were self-designated, really, and with many of them political connections all the way up to Washington. But when they got in there, they took a vote. They drafted a constitution, and they took a vote, and it was interesting to see how many people actually participated in that vote. As you were saying, there were supposed to be 190, but very, very few came, except for the last day of the vote.
Yeah.
All these people came for the first time so that they could vote. But how did what did the graphics show that you brought for us to take a look at here?
Okay, so basically, what we found was there were 88 votes in favor of the Constitution, which is very much pro-federal recognition, is what they were probably going to propose to the Department of Interior.
So out of 577,000 Hawaiians residing in the USA, there were none that participated in an election.
Yeah.
But 88
unelected delegates.
Unelected self-appointed delegates voted in support of it.
Yes. And so when we look at the graphics, the first graphic, Molokai and Lanai, there were two delegates. One delegate was opposed, one against, so it was 50% each way. And then next, when you look at Hawaii Island, there were 13 delegates, and 72% of them voted yes, 28% no. When you look at Kauai and Ni'ihau, Eo Kauai, 100% of them, which was only two delegates, said no. The next graphic shows Maui delegates. 50% of the Maui delegates voted yes and 50 no for this pro-federal recognition constitution. And then what's very interesting, when you look at the graphics for the outside of Hawaii vote, so these are delegates from the continent, 86% of them voted yes and 14% of them voted no. And the yes votes were 19. So this is a lot of votes compared to the outer islands. And then if you go next to the Oahu votes, this is where the vast majority of the votes came from. 76% of the Oahu delegates voted yes, and 22% of them voted no. So when you add the outside of Hawaii votes and the Oahu votes, that is 70 votes, 70 out of 88 votes that were in favor of this constitution. That's the vast majority of the yes votes came from Oahu and outside of Hawaii.
So it kind of begs the question about who's making the decisions for things that impact us here.
Yes.
I mean, for yourself, Mililani, you're born and raised Hawaii Island. And so to think that those on Oahu and those out of Hawaii can make the decisions for your island and for all these other islands.
It's really outrageous. But, you know, when you think about it as well, a state law was passed by state legislature saying register 2/3 of the Hawaiians in this state. Millions were spent by Robin Danner and all the commissioners flying back and forth across the U.S., many trips to Interior, up in Washington, D.C. They didn't deliver the vote, but nevertheless, this kind of crippling process goes forward. You know, Lehua, when we get down to the next step, because they're talking now about another nonprofit being created, they're trying to raise funds for a ratification. You know, what advice do we have for Hawaiians with regards to participating in this, and what's really at risk in ratifying this?
They at least understand that trying to get OHA to fund it could potentially bring the Equal Protection Challenge, because again, we're limiting the vote to just Hawaiians.
Yeah.
That was the decision that came out of their AHA. So they formed the ainalahui.com, and they're encouraging people to donate funds. They've already raised $70,000, primarily large donations, but they're trying to get the smaller donations as well. And then ultimately, when you look at and connect why we talked about DOI and Aupuni on this show, when you connect them, the ratification of this Constitution is the key component.
It is.
And so it's critical. I know for us on the show, Mililani, Healani, myself, we oppose this process from day one. We are all not on the Kana'i Oluwalu roll because we object to this whole process, and that is a state-created process. You know, we've always talked about self-determination is a right of peoples. It's not governments. Governments shouldn't be involved in this process, and you yourself have advocated for years in international...
Yeah, this is not self-determination at all. This is government determination.
Absolutely. So the concern is that there's going to be this ratification vote. Who's going to be allowed to vote? If it's limited to that Kana'i Oluwalu roll, we're all excluded, clearly, because we chose not to participate. Now, you know, I would continue, as we have, to advocate to our community to boycott this process. Now, people say, well, if we boycott and we don't participate, then we let the 88, you know, make the decision for all of us. I hear that. But I think it makes a statement when so many decide not to participate in the process, because even the DOI has number triggers that they need to hit to reach certain numbers. So I continue to say we need to oppose. I know there are others, Moani Akaka, for example, who participate in the AHA, who is out there encouraging people to vote no. If you are on the roll, I still would encourage you not to vote. But if you feel you have to vote, then please register a no vote. But again, I would still first of all call for the boycott, because we cannot support a process that, again, is all about the government and a top-down approach and not really of our peoples.
And you know, why was this entire manipulative process put in place? Well, it's easy to see. If you take a look at the Department of Interior memorandums and the question and answer sheet, there's the answer. Will the new Hawaiian nation have land? Answer, no. The new Hawaiian nation is not allowed to have land, but they will be able to get the bombing target of Kaho'olawe, where no one lives, which is still littered with live ordnance. Will the Hawaiian nation have powers similar to the Indian nations, powers to build schools, pursue education, housing? The answer is no. The Hawaiian nation has no power. And when you read the Federal Register, why are they pushing this? So that people can get money from Congress. So creating a nation that is economically self-sufficient is not the goal. The goal is to facilitate those who have been receiving from Danny Inouye and others. They want to continue to suck at the federal tit now that the senator is gone, and that's what this is about. Also, no claims allowed. So no reparations, no claims for the overthrow of the Hawaiian government. what are we going to do in terms of the presidential election? Because right now, over this issue, both candidates, or at least the Democratic candidates, have taken position. What do you think about Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton coming in on this issue?
Well, Hillary Clinton obviously just rubber stamped this whole AHA process and the Constitution. And again, that's part of the administration's position, right? Let's just let the Hawaiians have nothing and we keep all the resources as the state and the federal government. Bernie Sanders had an interesting position about saying about he's, willing to work with Hawaiians to achieve energy independence, protecting the environment, but specifically on Native Hawaiian issues. He said he acknowledged the wrong that had occurred. And so, I hate to put too much hope in that. And I know you made a statement on Facebook about,
Yeah, we have to.
What is your mana'o?
Yeah, my mana'o is, I think Bernie Sanders is the better candidate. He's not owned by a corporation, basically. And that's the fear. But we can't put all our hopes into the presidential candidate. We got to do it ourselves. We got to be out there and educate our own, and be out there and advocate for our own. And I think we can't put too much hope in a white man again. It's just it's a process that is rigged against us always.
Yeah. Well, Healani has really been at the forefront out in the community, really educating. She's she'll talk a little bit about Aha Aloha Aina. You're talking about maybe having a future show on that. But one of the things that Healani's really been doing too is the Kalahui Political Action Committee testifying at the legislature. And one of the things we are looking at doing is bringing a report card back to the community to share, this is what your elected officials and the decisions they made on these critical issues that impact our community. So that'll be an important piece for KPAC to continue to educate and inform people who decide to vote, that they cast an informed vote about how their elected officials voted on issues that are important to Hawaiians.
Right.
I've been up at the Mary Monarch the last few days, and Moani Keala Akaka, ex-OHA trustee and a candidate to the AHA, has been there, and she is lobbying the people at the Mary Monarch, Hawaiians, giving them an informational sheet, which thank you for putting up on the website, the protestnaiaupuni.com website if you want to see it. But Moani had told me that she's very concerned that the word get to the Hawaiian homesteaders. They have a lot to lose.
Yeah, they have the most to lose.
They have the most to lose. And the thing about it is that when I looked at the rules, it was very clear on ratification. This whole thing falls apart if they don't get at least 9,000 Hawaiian homestead lessees to go along with it and vote yes. And I had to agree with Moani. Hawaiian homesteaders need to be particularly vigilant on this issue, not only informing yourself as to why it's bad, but making sure that everybody else at the community level knows that it's bad, and those people need to say no and vote against it. Yeah. But I think our homesteaders are looking at a lot to lose, and I'm happy to see Colleen Hanabusa really dedicating time to educate and to work with the homesteaders on this. But, as we get to the end of the show, what are the most important things we can do with regards to getting ready for the DOI and working in our communities now to encourage real participation in alternatives like the Aha Aloha Aina?
Well, I'll let you talk about that, but I'll quickly say, a good friend of mine, Randall Aki, went to D.C., and one of the key things his contacts in D.C. told him is to really register our opposition. We have to continue that voice that we started with ainalahui.com to let them know that there's opposition to this whole process, and we're all not rolling along with this, and educate our community. So I think that's really key. But I know you have some.
I think with this Kanai'olowalu Nai'aupuni Department of Interior proposed rules, this whole process is about empowering those that are already in power. It's not about empowering Native Hawaiians or Kanaka Maoli in the community. And I think if any of you are interested, we are looking for more places to host. We're looking for hosts.
If anyone out there wants workshop, how can they contact you?
Aloha Aina. ahaalohaaina@gmail.com, or they can go to our website at ahaalohaaina.com.
Thank
So,
you, ladies, for agreeing to be guests on the First Friday show. And remember, you heard it first on the First Friday show. Aloha.
Thanks and praise is not essential. And so thank God for making me what I am. Cause I'm a true Hawaiian. What's a true Hawaiian? What is a true Hawaiian? What is a true Hawaiian?
It's the Hawaiian, the true Hawaiian. The only way I know how to live is Hawaiian. No matter where I go, I'll always be Hawaiian trained. To understand, keep Hawaiian lands in Hawaiian hands. When Hawaiian lands is being bought by the other man. When I was young, I used to listen to the stories that my grandmother told her. But now I'm much older, and the things that I see with my eyes, I can't believe. How can we